Hi everyone, I'm Dan Held, Fighting Texas Aggie class of 2010, and I'm here today to cover Introduction to Bitcoin. You've probably heard about Bitcoin before. It sounds kind of confusing. Well, hopefully by the end of this presentation, you're going to understand it a little bit more clearly. And a little bit of background on me. So I've been in crypto 8 years, worked at 5 crypto companies and sold 2. So it's been a long, crazy journey. I've spent a lot of time telling people how Bitcoin works, why it's valuable to them. And hopefully today I've distilled that narrative down to where it makes sense to you. And I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my screen. So this is my introduction to Bitcoin deck. And we've already done my introduction. So I'm going to go next to what is Bitcoin? We're going to start with that being the big kind of bold question right off the bat. Well, as John Oliver puts it, Bitcoin is everything you don't understand about money with everything you don't understand about computers. At least that's the feeling that you get when you first hear the word. Your friend might have told you like, oh, it's about encryption and all these other things, and your eyes kind of glaze over. Well, don't feel too left out because it is quite complicated. It's the intersection of a lot of different disciplines: economics, politics, computer science, game theory, even physics. And that's where I think, there's a lot of nuance here into how it works and why it's important, but I've come up with a very distilled way to think about it. Some quick clarifications before we get started. Bitcoin is not a cheap PayPal. It was not meant to replace PayPal. It was meant to replace central banks and banks. Central bank digital currencies, which are a hot new topic, those aren't an innovation. They're simply just the existing system with a central bank issuing more control. Finally, there's Bitcoin, and then there's everything else. So a lot of people say the word crypto to kind of bucket all these cryptocurrencies and crypto assets together. Bitcoin stands alone in its value prop and what it's solving. So, with this being said, let's go ahead and dive in. I wrote a series of articles called Planting Bitcoin, Bitcoin's origin story and why it's important. I felt that this analogy was a good way for folks to grok how Bitcoin worked. So Satoshi, in his brilliance of creating Bitcoin, his brilliance didn't stop with his species of tree, a species of money that he chose to plant. It was the season, the soil, and the gardening techniques that mattered as well. And so in the first section that we cover, it's called species. And when we think about a money is kind of like a different species of currency. So you've got the euros, the dollars, and Bitcoin. And with certain types of money, same with gold as well. With certain types of money, they have different traits. So we can think about the code of life being written into an organism at its inception. Satoshi carefully architected Bitcoin's DNA or genetic code to be the best money ever created. We can think of Bitcoin's genetic code as representing instructions that have been written to incentivize the organization and coordination of cellular function. And so when we look at these different traits, we can see the traits of Bitcoin versus gold and fiat. Fiat is government money. That's what that stands for. So in biology, a trait or character of a feature is a feature of an organism. And according to Charles Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection, organisms that possess heritable traits that enable them to better adapt to their environment compared with other members of their species will be more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass on their genes to the next generation. Money is no different. Money has traits that enables it to survive and thrive as a store of value, medium of exchange. A medium of exchange would be like you using this to pay for coffee. Are you using the money to pay for coffee? And unit of account. So you go to the grocery store and the units are in dollars. Bitcoin is a new species of money that has vastly superior traits to its predecessors. And diving into some of these traits, so verifiability. With Bitcoin, you can verify the ownership of every single Bitcoin ever in existence with your home computer. That's pretty incredible because with gold and fiat, so government money, we have no idea how much exists. We have to trust in centralized parties with fiat to trust in their auditing of their reserve, of how many dollars or euros or yen have been printed. And with gold, we don't, there's no tracker on bars of gold, so we don't know exactly how much exists out there. There's other characteristics as well, and I'm not going to go through all of these, but for example, some of the ones where Bitcoin shines, portability. You can't send gold in an email. And then you've got scarcity, which I think is probably one of the most important characteristics. Bitcoin scarcity is is incredible because there is an exact 21 million Bitcoin. We don't see that with gold. Gold, we don't know how much more gold will be created. We just know that it's in high demand. And with fiat money, government money, as we've seen during COVID, they will print as much fiat money as they desire. So it is not scarce at all. Now, when a new money is created, it goes through different eras. Right now, Bitcoin is going through the store of value era. So first, people need to store value in a new money before they want to use it in a medium of exchange or unit of account function. You must first hold it and have it in your wallet before you can spend it. And so Bitcoin, on its trajectory to becoming a full global money, a gold 2.0, needs to go through these stages. Now, reserve currency status doesn't last forever. And when we look at the survivor, like how long different currencies survive, we see that inevitably each one dies over time. Now, I've been presumptive here by having Bitcoin take over from the US. But a lot of folks, especially Aggies, don't realize that the U.S.'s dominance in the world as a monetary authority has only existed for 100 years, and there were countries that had this before. And if we're going along the species analogy here, extinction can be most simply described as the failure of a species to compete in an environment to such a degree that it eventually ceases to exist. And usually what occurs there is that there are two primary causes of why it goes extinct: increased competition from a superior species or a dramatic change in environment. And instead of becoming anti-fragile, which is the property of growing stronger or in a volatile or more stressful environment, central banks have essentially removed danger and mortality from failure, which causes competition to stagnate or degrade. And sometimes these stressors are so strong that they are fatal for a species of money. And so Bitcoin has been perfectly honed for its environment. Bitcoin was created with exceptional genetic code, which manifested itself in the form of traits. And essentially this gives Bitcoin it makes Bitcoin the apex predator of money. That's what Satoshi built Bitcoin for, was to be a superior money than all previous monies before it. And the next section we're going to go into, so this first section was about species. So Satoshi carefully selected Bitcoin's genetic code to be the superior species of money. Now we're going to go into season. So in what season did Satoshi plant Bitcoin? This is a really amazing quote that I love from Satoshi that I think highlights exactly why Bitcoin is valuable. Satoshi wrote this as the first thing he wrote right after he published the white paper. So when he published the source code to make Bitcoin run and get the network up and running, this is what he presented. The root problem with conventional currency is all the trust that's required to make it work. The central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but history of fiat currencies is full of breaches of that trust. Banks must be trusted to hold our money and transfer it electronically, but they lend it out in waves of credit bubbles with barely a fraction in reserve. And these two quotes, I think, are very poetic, coming from Henry Paulson, former U.S. Treasury Secretary, and he was there during the 2008 financial crisis, and he was a former Goldman Sachs CEO. He says, "I believe the root cause of every financial crisis, the root cause is flawed government policies." And then Alan Greenspan, former chairman of the Federal Reserve, "In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. There is no safe store of value." And when we look at, Bitcoin over time and why it's important, when we look at inflation, so this was an incredible report put together by Deutsche Bank. If we look at inflation over time, over 800 years of recorded financial history, never before have we seen such incredible inflation. And that was since the Fed was created over 100 years ago. And when you see distortions like this, we are in one of the largest distortions ever created in the market, which is absolutely wild. Now, when looking at the US dollar, when we look at the dollar, when we look at the Roman denarius, when we look at every single fiat currency over time, the temptation to print money is irresistible. And so fiat continually loses value. This chart represents the purchasing power of a US dollar starting from 100 years ago. And when we think about it this way, it's like, what can $1 buy you? Back then, a dollar could buy you a lot. A dollar could maybe buy you like a week's worth of food. Now a dollar can barely buy you a soda. And that over time represented the huge devaluation of currency. You just didn't notice it because it was very, very gradual over time. Bitcoin was planted in the middle of the 2008 financial crisis. Satoshi waited until this perfect moment to plant Bitcoin when trust had been lost in a system that ran on trust. Bitcoin was an antidote to poor central banking policies. It was meant to solve this problem of trusting institutions. 2008 clearly demonstrated that there were huge breaches of that trust, huge breaches in fiduciary responsibility. And so Satoshi wanted to rebuild a new system using Bitcoin. So we've covered two sections so far: that Satoshi crafted Bitcoin as a new species of money, planted it right in the middle of the 2008 financial crisis as an antidote to poor central banking policy. Next, we're going to go into soil, or the folks that he first presented Bitcoin to that would enable it to succeed. I like this picture because this picture is of a boy reading a book in a bombed out bookstore in London during the Blitz in World War II. I've got a feeling that this is how the cypherpunks, who I'm about to cover next, felt when they read Satoshi's writing. They went, "This is what we've been looking for this whole time." These are the cypherpunks. So these are a few of them. There's many more, but these are the popular ones and the ones that I think folks should at least know of. You've got Adam Back in the upper right. He's the inventor of Hashcash, which was the early proof of work system that Bitcoin was eventually based on. You've got Wei Dai, who published B-Money, an anonymous distributed electronic cash system. Nick Szabo, a very popular candidate for Satoshi. Nick Szabo designed a currency called BitGold, and it was never implemented, but Satoshi said that his inspiration was from BitGold and B-Money, which is from Wei Dai. You've got David Chaum, who founded DigiCash, a form of centralized electronic money that deployed the same sort of cryptographic principles that Bitcoin had, that he called Chaumian eCash. And then finally, Hal Finney. Hal Finney's a classic favorite for Satoshi. Hal Finney also worked on proof of work systems with Adam Back, not with Adam Back, but separately. Their insight into that was the precursor towards before Bitcoin came out. He also wrote PGP and cryptography. So PGP is a popular encryption method used for secure communication. Hal Finney is definitely a favorite amongst crypto folks as being Satoshi. And what's funny is that Satoshi built Bitcoin and planted in the right season, and the soil were the cypherpunks, these folks who had previously tried to create cryptocurrencies before. Satoshi actually thought he was late to the game. And this quote is from him, where he says, "A lot of people automatically dismiss e-currency as a lost cause because of all the companies that failed since the 1990s. I hope it's obvious it was only the centrally controlled nature of those systems that doomed them. I think this is the first time we're trying a decentralized, non-trust-based system." And I commissioned this graphic by my animator, which actually walks through all of the technology that comes before Bitcoin, all of the tech that was required for Bitcoin to work. Bitcoin isn't MySpace. It's not MySpace. It's not Facebook. It's a whole iteration through decades. And that's where what I think is super interesting is that Bitcoin is actually built on decades worth of innovation. And then finally, gardening. So gardening is the last section where we cover, why, how. So Bitcoin was created as the best sound money ever created. It was planted in the right season, had the right soil where these cypherpunks understood and could help Satoshi build it. Well, Satoshi needed more. He needed a community, and that's where gardening comes in. Satoshi chose to be anonymous, which was really, really cool. Well, technically pseudonymous. Pseudonymous means we know his name is Satoshi, but we don't know who that is, which fit the ethos of the cypherpunks. These cypherpunks were big into encryption and using encryption for privacy and money. People can project hopes and dreams on an anonymous individual, ensuring maximal narrative fit. That's why a book is often better than the movie. His privacy was critical to the founder's story. Developer worship, or saying, oh, this developer, that developer is really brilliant, can be a dangerous thing for an open source project aiming for decentralization. Volunteers in Bitcoin need to rely on trusting the objective reality of the code rather than trusting in one single leader and attaching themselves to those human characteristics. Satoshi very much felt that this was a revolution. With Bitcoin, he says, we can win a major battle in an arms race and gain a new territory of freedom for several years. And in his public statements, he usually focused on ordinary mainstream users, with his tone sometimes even excited and suggesting many ways Bitcoin could be made more convenient or useful in commerce or other things. He was practical, which made interactions very easy and comfortable, and he tended to avoid arguments on philosophy or politics. Satoshi additionally took steps to signal to the cypherpunks and future members that Bitcoin wasn't a scam. He never spent any of the coins that he mined, which makes Satoshi one of the wealthiest people in the world. He also had Bitcoin available to mine day one, so it was a fair launch. Anyone else could mine alongside him, and he never really used his influence in an overly intense manner. So this is a GIF from Mr. Robot, where essentially he disrupts the entire financial system. And Satoshi, I think, really wanted to do this as well. Satoshi wanted to create a new financial system that would enable this new world to where we didn't need these trusted third parties to control our money and to control the money supply. Bitcoin is ultimately a social breakthrough, not really a technical one, because it needs a community of folks, a community of people to help it out. And when we look at Bitcoin, Bitcoin is ultimately a tool that was only enabled through the hodlers. The hodlers are the ones who buy and believe in Bitcoin. So we've got Satoshi who built it, but he needed developers to help him continually develop it. But really the gardening, the community are the people who believed in it and prophesized and told people about it, like I am right now. And really what this journey is about is like a hero's journey in a way. It's a call to adventure of disrupting the financial system. You've got helpers along the way. You have kind of a death and rebirth of understanding how money works and then this transformation. A Bitcoin hodler in the journey of understanding Bitcoin goes along this hero's journey path. And some quotes I really like here, and to give some extra context, Mark Twain, one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain, where he says, "In the beginning of a change, the patriot is a scarce man and brave and hated and scorned. When his cause succeeds, the timid join him, for then it costs nothing to be a patriot." Satoshi built Bitcoin for the believers in a new financial system, the hodlers, the revolutionaries, the ones who were disenfranchised with the existing financial system, the ones who would be attracted by the prospect of sudden and spectacular change, the call to adventure. We must heed the call, the hero's journey that is rooted in HODL. The HODL meme, by the way, HODL is a term that Bitcoiners use as a way to kind of rally, as a rallying cry. It started with essentially a funny incident that happened on Reddit where a guy misspelled the word hold during a very intense, volatile period in Bitcoin's history. And that turned into a rallying cry, a meme that represented Bitcoin's cultural foundation. And through hodling, what's really interesting about that is that it bootstrapped Bitcoin into existence. Hodling Bitcoin increases the value, which increases demand, hash rate, which is security of the network, and in turn attracts new hodlers and developers. And that self-reinforcing feedback loop drives Bitcoin's network effects, security, and value. And, with Bitcoin's issuance schedule, that's what really incentivizes folks to get in early and to prophesize it and learn how to hodl. Satoshi needed this, he really needed a bootstrap. He needed to bootstrap the network with an incentive mechanism to get people in early on. And he did that through the issuance schedule. So we can see Bitcoin's inflation rate in blue here, annualized inflation rate, 30-day moving average, and Bitcoin's price in gray. The dotted lines are halvings. So the halvings, as we can see here, the halvings typically come before a bull run, and we're currently, we're way up here now. This graph's a little bit old. And what's interesting about this is that it's hypothesized that these halvings induce these bull runs. The idea being that a reduction in supply plus an increase in demand equals number go up. And what is unique to Bitcoin versus gold or other commodities is that there is no supply response to increases in demand. This means that no more Bitcoin are produced as demand for them increases, and that's what causes this really intense volatility. With oil or gold, they can be sourced from increasingly more expensive or difficult places when demand increases. But for Bitcoin, that doesn't happen. There's no, and they call that the supply response. And what's really interesting is that hodling here. People had to believe in Bitcoin back when it was worth a penny. This is Bitcoin at $1 here. So Bitcoin is worth pennies here. People had to believe in it, and they had to hodl it. And by hodling, they hold supply that is now not available for the market. And if we look, this is Bitcoin's inflation rate. If we look at the issuance schedule, it's basically the opposite of this, where right now we've printed 18.5 million Bitcoin out of 21 million total Bitcoin that'll ever be created. And that's what I was talking about earlier with Bitcoin scarcity. What's really interesting is that Satoshi tapped into something that's essentially a viral loop. So a viral loop in the traditional tech world, which I work in and is actually part of my job, is the idea being I get someone to try out a product, they like it, they tell their friend, and then that friend tries it and they like it and they tell their friend. That's a marketing viral loop. With Bitcoin, it's actually revolving around the price. The price is a critically important factor of how Bitcoin works and why we're here talking about it today. As the price goes up, people become more aware of it, and then they decide to learn about it. Then they buy it, and then they speak about it, which increases more people becoming aware that the price is going up. And that's what's so crazy is that most of us have heard about Bitcoin in 2013 or 2017 or right now during these bull runs when friends or family were talking about the rapid increase in price. It's through this viral loop that Bitcoin grows in adoption. The prices that signal to folks that Bitcoin is interesting, solves a problem, and that others are recognizing it as a new money. That volatility is a good thing. If it had stayed at $100, $1,000, none of us would be here. And Satoshi actually thought about this very early on. He wrote this when Bitcoin wasn't even worth a penny. So, in the beginning, when I mentioned that Bitcoin is full of the creation of Bitcoin and why how Bitcoin works is actually a combination of many different things. It's so interesting to see how Satoshi thought through the game theory of it. So this is what Satoshi thinks. In this sense, Bitcoin is more typical of a precious metal. Instead of the supply changing to keep the value the same, the supply is predetermined and the value changes. As the number of users grows, the value per coin increases. It has the potential for a positive feedback loop, also known as a viral loop. As users increase, the value goes up, which could attract more users to take advantage of the increasing value. Satoshi's describing FOMO here. And so for money, like for any money in the world, the price signals utility. And as the price climbs, Bitcoin becomes more liquid, which then allows for more market participants. And what's so brilliant about Bitcoin is that it's truly this revolution. This is a Banksy painting, and I think it really brings into focus what Bitcoin is trying to do here. Bitcoin isn't disrupting PayPal. It's not disrupting Facebook. It's not doing something that minor. Bitcoin is like the separation of church and state. Bitcoin is essentially enabling the separation of money and state. Early founding fathers were very against the idea of a central bank, and Bitcoin is a check and balance to that. Bitcoin, as I mentioned before, is not a technological breakthrough, really. It's more of a social one. It requires the hodlers to work and to believe in Bitcoin. And by believing in Bitcoin, its value increases, its security increases, more people use it, more developers build on it. And, with its position in the market now, it's essentially won by network effects. The crypto with the most hodlers, and this is why Bitcoin itself stands alone, therefore is more demanded by consumers and is the ultimate winner. Finally, Bitcoin promises an alternative for citizens across the world to keep their savings in a form of money that can neither be confiscated or diluted. If Bitcoin grows much larger, it may force governments to even become voluntary organizations. We live in a system to where you were born into a government without your permission and you've never signed an agreement to adhere to their laws or regulations or anything else. Bitcoin restores the check and balance to the system. It enables money to be separated from those entities. And through hodling, we can finally be free. Those who opt into Bitcoin are trading something abundant for something scarce, trading the past for the future, and trading financial dependence for financial sovereignty. And I'm going to end with a quote here from Nikola Tesla. Let the future tell the truth and evaluate each one according to his work and accomplishments. The present is theirs. The future, for which I have really worked, is mine. And that's what Satoshi was building. He architected the perfect genetic code to create a new species of money, Bitcoin. He then waited for the precise moment to plant the new species, the 2008 financial crisis. And at that moment, he distributed the white paper to the only group that cared, the cypherpunks. Finally, he nurtured Bitcoin to a stage where it no longer needed him. As the community got larger, he then stepped away and let everyone else do it. He hasn't been around for 7 years. Many digital cash systems came and went over the years before Bitcoin and after Bitcoin. Most were just white papers. Some wrote and developed code. Some even built a community. But it will be extremely difficult to repeat the success of Bitcoin's planting. Hope you all enjoyed, and the rest of the presentations should look awesome. Cheers.